I'm seeing hands all over. There we go. I heard myself, so I thought it was fine. Repeat, Black Bible, in chair, grab it out. Isaiah 40, that's where we're at. That's yours to take, give away, whatever it is that you would like to do with it. Please just give it away to people. We love giving away Bibles. We're going to be in Isaiah chapter 40 as we continue our series called Questions of Faith. And this is a series where we've looked at 5 different questions and encourage you to even go to our YouTube channel and you can review back. For instance, first week, is the Bible reliable? That's a pretty fair question to look at. And then today, now we're going to be looking at this one of why do, catch this, bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to good people? Every time that I have a conversation with someone and they're questioning their faith or they're wondering about faith or they're doubting faith or they're skeptical of faith, this inevitably, in some way or another, is a question that gets asked. And this is a question that's actually, it's simple to answer when you've been living a life of faith, but it can be really hard to explain to someone who hasn't been living a life of faith. And so I pray that today you might not come and say, wow, Pastor Robert, and especially God's Word really brought it to light, and I have all the conclusions, and I'm ready. But I hope that it would encourage you. Maybe, just maybe, this Jesus thing is something that can help me get through the challenges of life. Because the reality is, when we think of bad things, there's a lot of things that come to mind, but there's one thing, the worst thing we can think or imagine, and even in the Bible, everyone, including Jesus himself, experiences it. And what is that one thing? It's death. We often associate bad things with death, if we're to go to an extreme. I remember when I was a kid, growing up, my parents took me to church, and there was this family with a son the same age as me. And I'll never forget, here I am in elementary school, and this kid, he gets cancer. And within a year, he's no longer with us. And as a little kid, I'm wondering, this kid went to church. His family brought him to church. Why? Why would this happen? I remember being in college. And from the time I graduated high school till the time I graduated college, and I did it in 4 years, not like 7 or 8. In that 4-year period, I had lost 4 close friends of mine who I either went to high school with or went to college with. Some very, very close. You know, those people who were going to prom with your group of friends, the people who you spent your weekends with. In college, it was my fraternity big brother. Those people that you're really close with, and you ask, God, why? Why does this happen? Over and over again, I feel like I keep saying, there are countless people in my life who have just gone too soon. I think of my friend Anand, someone that we have supported, he and his wife Pam, and I've never met someone who's so faithful to God, who's so devout in his walk with the Lord, who I've seen God do miracles through, and miraculous things have happened because of what they're doing in India. And here I've seen thousands and thousands of kids, a whole generation of little kids in India grow up and have hope. But yet when his daughter was ready to graduate high school, God called him home. And you wonder why. It seems like he was so faithful. He was serving the Lord, and his wife, Pam, who we still support, is currently writing a book, and I can't wait for it to be published on how God is so good in all of that, as she recounts Anand's last year of life. There's a pastor right here in Macomb County named Cameron Walcott, and his son went to Parkway Christian right here, right down the road, right at 16 and Shaner. And one day he woke up and his wife and him went into their kid's bedroom and he was gone. Why? Why would God allow these kind of things to happen? Like I said, when someone is walking in a life of faith, they begin to see God's goodness in it. And Cameron actually wrote this book, I Love You, Little Mister, which makes me tear up because I think of my own kids. And I'd encourage you. Something like this, I'm happy to give it to you or have you reference it, can help you understand where someone from faith can actually see these things and see why God might have a bigger plan. See, the reality is in this world, death is the great equalizer. In 1 Corinthians, Paul wrote this, "So you see, just as death came into the world through a man, now the resurrection from the dead has begun through another man. Just as everyone dies because we all belong to Adam, everyone who belongs to Christ will be given new life." I think of this passage because we just sang the song, "Death Was Arrested." And what is the whole point of that song, the whole theme of the song, the whole premise of the song is announcing and proclaiming that while because of Adam's choice, we all have to suffer the consequence of death, because of what Jesus did for us, we having faith in him all can live forever. That death was arrested and it is no more. But it's a reality. It's a reality that we all face because we all face the same consequence. Often when we think of why that question, why do bad things happen to good people, there's something fundamentally flawed with the question. And what's fundamentally flawed with the question is that we say good people. What if I were to tell you that if I told my son, and you're sitting at our kitchen table, and I said to him, "Jacob, that kid is a good person, but that kid is a bad person. I want you to hang out with the good people and not the bad people." What am I saying about the kid that I labeled a bad person? Now, he might not be the nicest kid, my son, and I can help him try to handle that, but what am I fundamentally saying about that kid? That he's less than or not as good as this other kid. That there is a kid who is better than him. And we do this all the time. We label people good and we label them bad. But as we look through the lens of Scripture, I have news for you, myself included in this. We are all bad. To some degree, we have all done something wrong, bad, not right. And for us to look at the scale and say this person is better than this person, it really fundamentally can be wrong. You push it even to a further degree, and if we were to label them, then we're now in charge of the justice of those people. And so it is for us to hold the good or the bad to a certain degree. And yes, we have ways of law and we have things that keep things in order, which are important to our society and to life, and even are based on Scripture, because there is a consequence for doing bad things. It just doesn't mean just go be a rebel. But the reality is we all at some degree fit the label of bad. And so what causes us to be freed from that is only found in Christ Jesus. And we'll dig through that more. When we think of bad things, we often associate it also with trials. I think of sickness, job loss, financial struggle, internal or external conflict, whether it be depression or anxiety or fear. We associate bad things with injury or pain or loss. And these are things that make us inside wonder, why did this happen to me? But what we often learn through those trials is what? That the trials actually make us stronger. That they refine us. That they're the things that actually might not seem fair, but definitely when we look back are refining. I think of my life. Some of the highlights of my life are when I look back at the hardest times that we've had to go through. It is in those times that character is developed. It's in those times that you begin to understand perseverance. It's in those times that you're able to really look and see who is your identity and who are you and what are you called to be. Resilience is such an important thing in life, whether it be as a parent, as a family member, as a friend, as a coworker, employee. Over and over again, we're tested. And one thing I love about this city, the city of Detroit, in which we are in the suburbs of, is that we're known for our resilience. How would I know this? Dan Campbell attests to it. The Detroit Lions coach said this when he was hired. I wouldn't, have to quote him from now to that and again. He's not Jesus, but he said, "This is a resilient city. It is made up of good, hardworking, blue-collar people, and that's what our team is going to look like. They're going to learn to fight and get up again." It's this premise that when things are tough, you do what? You get up and you fight again. And we all say hurrah to that. We say yeah to that. We say that is a quote that I need to put on the screen, and even I'm going to make it into a sermon. And then it happens to us. And we say what? No, I thought I was doing enough good. Why did that happen to me? Romans chapter 5, Paul writes, "Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope." Paul himself, the man who was beaten, who was shipwrecked, who was imprisoned, who was put through persecution after persecution, found joy in his suffering. And that's why I love reading Paul. Because you see that this is a man who didn't look and say, wow, faith is this beautiful thing where I get to drive a Ferrari. I have all the things I could ever want or imagine. But no, he realized it was like the words of Jesus where Jesus said, even he didn't have a place to lay his head. You see, there's times in our journey in life that are challenging, and that's what we have to understand. I was reminded of this summer as I wanted to go spend a nice day on the water with the family. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh man, it would be nice to relax. Just look at the water, enjoy it. And then the weather just was not good. It was crummy. And I was in a bad mood. And I'm like, God, why would this happen? Why today would you make the weather bad? And my 7-year-old came up to me and he said, Dad, God's in charge of the weather, not you. Get over it. Sometimes we need that perspective of a 7-year-old. But knowing the pain and the reality of suffering doesn't just make us overcome it. Knowing the God who has overcome it does. Jesus said this in John 16. "I've told you all this so that you may have peace in me." Here's the words of Jesus. Here in this earth, you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I have overcome the world. If I could leave you with one thing, no matter who you are, you will face trials. I wish I could give you a big old smile. I wish I could promise you that that wasn't going to happen. But the reality is this world is full of them. Small trials and big trials. Our life is full of trials. Anyone on this journey knows it. But take heart, because there is hope in one who has overcome every one of those trials. And that's how we have to look at why would a good God allow this? If God is so good, if God is so loving, if he is the one who has overcome, why would he allow us to go through it? Here's the 2 quick answers, and then we'll dig into Isaiah and really dig in there, and then we're going to look at someone in the New Testament who had to face trials. The first answer I would give is this: God gave us the gift of free will and choice. He gave us a gift. When he created all things, he placed Adam in the garden, and he created Eve because he realized Adam was just struggling without a helper. So he made a helper suitable for him, and then there's Adam and Eve. And they're in the garden. And what did God say to them? You can have anything in this garden except this one tree, the knowledge of good and evil. Well, there couldn't be good if there's not evil, right? So there has to be good and evil. If God is a good God, there can't just be God and then just everything is good. Why? Because then we would all be God ourselves, number one. But number two, there has to be something outside of God. And so he says, look, Adam and Eve, you can have all of this. And the whole Bible is about how God desires to restore things to how they once were. Because what happens? Adam and Eve are given this choice. They can have everything. But just like Adam and Eve, you know how it is. When you are told you can have all of this, but not this one thing, the only thing you want is that one thing. You can have anything in the world, but not this one thing. You can eat any food in the world, but not pasta. That would be painful, for me at least. And so anyways, you look at all of those things, and what do? They make the decision to eat of the fruit of that tree. Did God force it on them? Did he say, you're going to do it? No, he gave them the choice, and they chose to eat of the tree. And so this gets to why would God allow us to do this? Well, I have a question for you, and I asked this in a sermon previously, but this time I won't make you raise your hands. I want you to think about your answer. If you could have no suffering in your life, never one thing, no pain, no trial, no hardship, nothing, everything would just be taken care of for you, right? You wouldn't even have to go to the grocery store because that is suffering. But you couldn't make a single decision. Would you want that life? You couldn't choose what you ate. You couldn't choose what you wore. You couldn't choose what you did that day. Every decision was made for you. You were a robot. Or you could make choices in this world. And you could choose things. And you could make decisions. And you could have a will of your own. But there would be times of suffering. Which would you choose? When I think of what I would choose, I would get super bored being a robot. I would feel tortured in that life. But I would have so much joy in having a life where I could choose things. And God in his goodness did what? He didn't make us a bunch of robots, but he gave us a choice. And that's answer one. Answer two is God knows that challenges strengthen us. He knows this. Proverbs 27:17 is a famous verse. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. The idea that through the trial, through the fire, through the refining, we are made stronger. And so those are two very quick answers, but let's look at what Isaiah 40 has to say about it. Isaiah 40, we find this on page 597, and as we dig in, we're going to see that these people are currently exiles out of Judah, Israel, as we would understand, Jerusalem, all that area. Exiles to who? Babylon. And the Babylonians have a 70-year reign on them. We're even told we have found some archaeological evidence that references this. What we know is that they were even given food portions. I was talking to a friend of mine who just got back from Cuba on a mission trip, and he said that in Cuba, people literally line up in their bread lines, and they get what we would know as like a hamburger bun of bread a day. Could you imagine? This is in our world, 2023. And lining up every day for a hamburger bun because that's what you got. And you go to the grocery stores and they're empty. You go into the pharmacy and the pharmacy is as big as a CVS or a Walgreens, but yet the shelves are empty. Everything is rationed and given to you. This happens in our world now. This was happening to the Israelites. And this is why I believe in nations like Cuba, God is just working in a miraculous way because people are seeing the pain and suffering in this world, but the comfort that their God can bring, and they're being drawn to it. And so in this exile, this is what is said in Isaiah. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. That's a good way to start, isn't it? Not just once, but like twice. Comfort, comfort. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Tell her that her sad days are gone and her sins are pardoned. Yes, the Lord has punished her twice over for all her sins. There's this thing we see right here in Isaiah where we see that Israel, as we saw through our journey through Exodus, did what? Oh, we believe in you, God. We love you, God. We're going to go our own way. Oh, we trust in you, God. We want to serve you, God. Oh, we're going to go in our own way. And we see this happen over and over and over again. And here we see God says, look, okay, you've been captives. Your decisions have led you to this. But have comfort. I'm here for you. I haven't given up on you. So the first thing we see right there is that God promises comfort. We also see in the next few verses that God promises his power and his glory. Listen, it's the voice of someone shouting, "Clear the way through the wilderness for the Lord. Make straight the highway through the wasteland for our God." Verse 3 right there. You can highlight that one. We'll talk about it at the end. Does this remind you of anything that is said in the New Testament? There's this man called John the Baptizer or John the Baptist. And this exact passage is referenced by Jesus to be in reference to him. And we always associate it there, but here we see it in Isaiah. Fill the valleys at the level of the mountains and hills, straighten the curves and smooth out the rough places. Verse 3 shows us that God has a plan and that he's going to reveal that plan. Verse 4 shows us that God is over everything, including nature itself. That God has the ability to fill the valleys, to level the mountains, and to straighten the curves and smooth the rough places. Do you see the imagery in this? Look at how powerful God is. Find me one person that can flatten a mountain. You can have all the dynamite in the world. I don't think you're going to flatten it. Those things are huge. And then verse 5, then the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all the people will see it together. The Lord has spoken. We see the power of God. Verse 3 is quoted in all four Gospels. Verse 4 and 5 show that God has power even over the natural world that we see. But this is what we see in verses 6 and following. God reminds us that life is short, but God is eternal. You need to hear that again. Life is short, but God is eternal. This is what it says. A voice said, "Shout." I asked, "What should I shout?" What should I shout? You ready for what he has to shout? Shout that people are like grass. Of all the analogies, grass. Their beauty fades as quickly as the flowers in a field. The grass withers and the flowers fade beneath the breath of the Lord, and so it is with people. The grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of our God stands forever. This is a humbling passage because all of us, as James would say, are but a mist, here today and gone tomorrow. But what does it say lasts forever? The word of the Lord. He always was and he always will be. We have a birth date. And we have another date that goes on our tombstone. Now, as Christians, that date, there's an arrow to the end of that, and that's a beautiful thing. But it's a reality we all face. And that's why it's a great equalizer. Because everyone is held accountable before the Lord. And what we see is people who once thought they were powerful have to succumb to the same consequence. If you take a couple different people and you were to put them next to each other, you would wonder, how would justice possibly be served? Let's take two people, for instance. The one I'm going to take is Adolf Hitler. He was a powerful man. He had an army that conquered a lot of the world. Some of you lived through these dark and hard times. I would say pretty wretched, cold of heart. Take Martin Luther King Jr., a man who fought peacefully for justice. He was a man who was a pastor, a reverend, and he preached the word of God. These two men, one would take his own life because he saw the walls caving in. The other would be taken by someone else who hated him for the color of his skin and what he was doing. Both have the same end. But yet, we have to believe that there must be justice. And if it was justice in our own doing that was to be served, we would have the same justice for both, wouldn't we? So there has to be an eternal justice, one that is bigger than that. There has to be a God that knows a man's heart and that can hold him accountable for everything. The end, that's where we see that God is just. And his justice prevails. In both of those circumstances, they would have to stand before the Lord, and they would be given an account, and God's justice would prevail. And so, we see that no matter who we are, no matter how powerful, no matter our title, we're all grass that withers or flowers that fade, but we have a God who stands the test of time. And he promises to look after us. Look at verse 9. O Zion, messenger of good news, shout from the mountaintops. Shout it louder, O Jerusalem. Shout and do not be afraid. Tell the towns of Judah, your God is coming. Yes, the sovereign Lord is coming in power. He will rule with a powerful arm. See, he brings his reward with him as he comes. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will carry the lambs in his arms, holding them close to his heart. He will gently lead the mother sheep with their young. Do you see this picture of a God who cares for his people, who looks after them as if they're these tender flock? So the question we have to really wrestle with is this. Do we believe that God is God? And that is the question. If we look at verses 12 to 30, we see that God is all-powerful and all-knowing. Catch these verses. Who else has held the oceans in his hand? Who has measured off the heavens with his finger? Who else knows the weight of the earth or the weight of the mountains and the hills on a scale? We can try to estimate them scientifically, but could we put them on a scale? No. But God knows their exact weight. He's the one who created them. Who is able to advise the Spirit of the Lord? Who knows enough to give him advice or teach him? Has the Lord ever needed anyone's advice? There's a question. Has God ever needed your advice? Does he need instruction about what is good? Do you need to tell God what is good? Did someone teach him what is right or show him the path of justice? To those rhetorical questions, what is the answer? No, because he's God, and he's put it all into motion, and he's bigger than us. No, for the nations of the world are but a drop in the bucket. Hear that again. The nations of the world are but a drop in the bucket. Think of every empire in this world that once thought they dominated the world. What happened to them? They fell. And while I love the freedoms and what I've been given as an American, I got to tell you, my hope is not in America, but it's in God. And it's in a kingdom that is greater than this world. And my question time and time again is, are we putting our hope in nations that the Bible tells us will fall, like a drop in the bucket? Or do we put our hope in a God who is bigger? They are nothing more than dust on the scales. He picks up the whole earth as though it was a grain of sand. Does that not give you perspective of how big God is? The whole earth is but a grain of sand. All the wood in Lebanon's forest and all Lebanon's animals would not be enough to make a burnt offering worthy of our God. The nations of the world are worth nothing to him. In his eyes, they count for less than nothing, mere emptiness and forth. What is this showing us? It's showing us how big God is. One of my favorite things to do is on a clear night sky, look at the stars. Because it makes me think of how small I am. I think I'm so big. I'm 6'4". I'm pretty big. But then I look at the stars. Or I look at someone who's 6'4" with muscles. And I realize I'm not big. And God is saying, look, I'm bigger than anything you can imagine. To who can God compare? What image can you find to resemble him? Can he be compared to an idol formed in a mold, overlaid with gold and decorated with silver chains, like so many faiths do? Can he be like that idol? Or if people are too poor for that they might at least choose wood that won't decay and a skilled craftsman to carve an image that won't fall down? Haven't you heard? Don't you understand? Are you deaf of the words of God, the words he gave before the world began? Are you so ignorant? God sits above the circle of the earth. The people below him seem like grasshoppers to him. I just want to pray, God, why am I a grasshopper? He spreads out the heavens like a curtain and makes his tent from them. He judges the great people of the world, and he brings them all to nothing. They hardly get started, barely taking root, when he blows on them, and they wither. The wind carries them off like chaff. These are some humbling words, aren't they? To whom will you compare? Who is my equal? Asked the Holy One. I want you to hear these words as God is saying, look, who else do you compare me to? Who else measures up to these things? Look up to the heavens, who created all the stars. He brings them out like an army, one after another, calling each by its name. Because of his great power and incomparable strength, not a single one is missing. Oh, Jacob, how can you say the Lord does not see your troubles? If you're going through a hard time, and you know that God knows every star by name, and yet he says, oh, Jacob, how can you not see that the Lord does not see your troubles? Oh, Israel, how can you say God ignores your rights? Have you never heard? Have you never understood? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of all the earth. He never grows weak or weary. No one can measure the depths of his understanding. He gives, catch this, he gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless. Even youths will become weak and tired, and young men will fall in exhaustion. We all know that. We all get tired. Gosh, I was cutting the grass the other day, and Jessica came up. She's like, what's wrong? I'm like, I'm just tired. I was cutting the grass, and my lawnmower has an automatic feature where the wheel spins a little bit automatically for me. He doesn't have exhaustion, but those who trust in the Lord, verse 31, if you trust in the Lord, you will find new strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. How can this be? What is so important to us is that our earthly standing is not a reflection of our heavenly status. Our earthly standing is not a reflection of our heavenly status. And so I want to end with a story. It's found in Matthew chapter 11, verses 1 to 19. And this is a story of John the Baptist. And when I share this story, I really think of the question, why would bad things happen to good people? And I think of the perspective that we were given in Isaiah 40 of a God who's bigger than us. A God who says our earthly status and standing is not a reflection of our heavenly one. A God who says even in the kingdom of God, the least will be greatest and the greatest will be least. And this is what it says. When Jesus had finished giving these instructions to his 12 disciples, he went to teach and preach in towns throughout the region. John the Baptist, remember his cousin who leaped in his mother's womb, who was in prison. What is John's status? He's in prison. If we go a few chapters later in chapter 14, we see that it was basically because a woman in the kingdom wanted him to be in prison, and so the king put him in prison. And then eventually, drunkenly, the king says, okay, I'll do whatever you want. And so then she says, I want John's head on a platter. And so she actually kills John. Talk about a dumb move. So he's in prison and heard about all the things the Messiah was doing. So he sent his disciples to ask Jesus, are you the Messiah we've been expecting, or should we keep looking for someone else? He wants to know. You've ever doubted, had questions? John was trying to get some reassurance here. I really want to know Jesus is the one. I really want to know it's my cousin. Jesus told them, go back to John and tell him what you have heard and seen. Catch this. The blind see, the lame walk. Those with leprosy are cured. The deaf hear, the dead are raised to life, and the good news is being preached to the poor. If we look at Luke's account, or in Luke chapter 7, it says that two of John's disciples come, they ask, and right in front of them, Jesus performs these miracles. You're John. Your disciples come back, and they're like, John, I know that it sucks here in prison, but Jesus is healing people. He's setting them free. He's the blind, they see, the deaf, they hear. And if you're John, what's your reaction? Let's be honest for a second. Well, what about me? What about me? The blind hear, the deaf see, the deaf hear, the blind see. People are being raised from the dead. The prisoners are being set free. The captives. And I'm here. And we know his end fate is he's going to be beheaded. And this is his cousin. Let's be honest for a second. We would sit and say, why me, God? Why me? Jesus says these words. God blesses those who do not fall away because of me. Why did Jesus add those words? Why did he want John to know those words? Because he knew John, his mission on earth was done. And prison was going to be his final destination here. But there was an eternity that was greater. And that God was going to bless him if he stayed faithful and stayed focused on Christ. What would your reaction be? Would it be rejoicing? Would it be self-pity? We're never told, but I imagine that John was full of joy. Because it says, as John's disciples were leaving, Jesus began talking about him to the crowds. What kind of man did you go into the wilderness to see? Was he a weak reed swayed by every breath of wind? Was John a weak reed that every time the wind blew, he swayed? Or were you expecting to see a man dressed in expensive clothes? Remember what he was dressed in? Camel toe? Like camel hair and stuff? No. People with expensive clothes live in palaces. Were you looking for a prophet? Yes, and he is more than a prophet. John is to the man who the scriptures refer when they say, look, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, and he will prepare a way before you. Where's that passage from? Isaiah 40. I tell you the truth, verse 11, of all who have ever lived, none is greater than John the Baptist. Of every single person that has ever lived, none is greater than John. You think you're great? You're not John the Baptist. You think that person was good? They're not John the Baptist. Even with his weird get-up. So what does he say to end that? Yet even the least person in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he is. What is with that statement? Well, because I believe it really helps us understand, in conclusion, what life is all about and how we can answer, why do bad things happen to good people? I would say that a bad thing happened to John. He was unfairly executed. Was he not? He was put in prison, probably very unfairly. His life, if we were to look at the time here, was not fair. But in the end, God's goodness, justice, and fairness shine through. While our view of good and bad is limited to a finite lifetime, God's view is eternal. And that's why he says, even the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he is. What is he saying? He's saying great rulers, great men, great people in this world, their status of greatness, it can end there because they don't have access to eternity. But even the person who just gets access by the hair of their chinny chin chin, just that person, had to quote the pigs, right? And the big bad wolf, even them, they're great. Greater than any ruler, greater than any person who's achieved status in this world without God. On a scale of eternity, we're blessed with life here on earth. But our kingdom impact is so much more important than our time span. You're going to face trials. You're going to face pain. You're going to face struggle. And you're not going to often be able to say, why is this happening to me? But if you keep your eyes fixed on the Lord and lean not on your own understanding, you will see that he makes your path straight, and he has a plan that's bigger than your plan. I think of my grandfather, who he was adopted because of the whole situation of how he came into conception. And his mom chose to spare his life and to give him off. And he was adopted by a Christian family. And that Christian family raised him as Christian camp directors. And they raised him to know the Lord and to understand the Lord. And he was blessed with 3 children who what? Grew to know the Lord and understand the Lord. One being a pastor, one being an elder. Faithful people of faith over and over, who then poured into who? Their grandchildren. And their grandchildren have gone to be leaders in churches and Christians all around the globe. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the faithfulness of that couple that adopted my grandfather and raised him in faith. I never met them, but yet they're a part of my story. See, God has a bigger plan than you could ever imagine. And whatever you're going through, if you keep your eyes fixed on him and if you think of the kingdom impact that you're making, you will understand that in the scale of eternity, even in heaven, the least will be greater than anyone on this earth. Will you pray with me?